This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha, one of the fastest growing men's channels on YouTube. And today we're back at you with another great story, and you can see the title right on your screen. I reconnected with my old love at a high school reunion and destroyed my marriage. Now let's get into this story. And this woman starts out and she says, I'm writing here to help clear my conscience, to get support and perhaps some valuable free advice. My husband and I are in our late 40s and have been married for over 24 years. We have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. For confidentiality reasons, I'm not going to give too much detail about us, only enough to explain the situation. We had a great marriage for the first 16 years. That's when a brief, ill-conceived affair I had with an old boyfriend years before was disclosed to my husband by my old boyfriend's ex-wife. I'll now try to explain things as best I can. A little over 7 years into my marriage, I attended my 15-year high school reunion, and my husband attended with me. I was part of the alumni committee and flew home 6 days before the event. Now that's something right there I want to point out. When it comes to these reunions, whether it's a high school reunion or a college reunion, as a man, I would never let my girlfriend, my fiance, my spouse go back and attend any part of those reunions on their own. She says, my girls came with me and my husband flew in and joined us the night before the main event. He and I attended the reunion and we all stayed with my parents. While there without my husband, now listen to this, I reconnected with my first real boyfriend. I'll call him Reed. Reed and I then proceeded to have inappropriate contact multiple times that week. Now, what's interesting in this story is the only person in the story that she assigned a name to was her old boyfriend. I don't know if you read anything into that, but I just noticed that. Everybody else she just calls by, general terms like my son, my husband. Maybe there's nothing to it, but I just wanted to point that out. Reed at the time was also married with 2 kids of his own. He claimed his marriage was on the rocks and he was unhappy. At the time, my marriage was beautiful and fulfilling. Thinking back, I believe the reason I did it was to recapture some of the excitement from my youth. The years of being a mother and housewife in a safe marriage made me crave for the excitement and risk. I hate myself, she says. For those 3 days we were together, so for 3 days, this wasn't just like a one-time thing. We snuck around just like we did back in high school, except this time we were hiding our actions from our spouses in addition to our parents. We broke things off 2 days before the reunion as we realized what a big mistake we had made. We swore then to have no further contact and to go on living our lives as if it didn't happen. The reunion was a success. Now here's the part that really grinds my gears, in addition to the cheating. I mean, the cheating is an end-all, and it's terrible and as bad as you can get. But even to make things even worse, listen to what she does now. She says, I even introduced my husband to my old boyfriend and his wife. We all talked for a while, and having those 2 men side by side, I couldn't believe I cheated on my husband, as he is the true light of my life and my rock. I felt so terrible, so guilty. I promised myself right then and there that I would never tell him, as it would hurt him deeply, but I would make it up to him. For the next 9 years, our marriage was just about as good as one could dream of. During this time, I felt driven to do everything to satisfy him, and I did. I gave him every part of me, and made it a point to initiate some level of affection every day. I took care of everything at the house and with the kids, so when he came home from work, he could just relax and enjoy his family. The guilt I felt was and is so deep, but I also have gotten such joy in being a great wife and mother to my kids, of which we now had three, as I had given birth to a boy 8 years ago. Now remember that because that comes into play later. My husband was also proud in having a son, and those two have been a team since he was born. To be fair, my husband is a very doting father and shows the same level of love for both of our daughters as well. Everything was so good for us until one day when my husband came home from work early and said we needed to talk. I was worried and thought something bad happened at work. Instead, he proceeds to tell me that earlier in the day he had talked with the ex-wife of my old boyfriend. As soon as he spoke their names, my heart began pounding. I couldn't breathe, and I actually got lightheaded. You can see this woman is a little bit of an actress here, very dramatic. He said she told him her husband confessed to her about an affair he and I had years ago. She said that her husband was diagnosed with an aggressive form of Parkinson's disease 6 years ago and now is in the advanced stages. They've been divorced for 7 years, which I also didn't know, she says in parentheses, which I find that hard to believe in today's modern day when you have Facebook and all this other social media. And she's part of this alumni committee, and she didn't know that her old boyfriend had Parkinson's disease and that he was divorced. I don't buy it. But she says she and her kids still help him with some stuff as his condition had steadily deteriorated. Apparently, he was so taken with guilt, he broke down and confessed. She's remarried now, but she assists her kids with his grocery shopping and some basic errands as he doesn't have anyone else. To her, the affair didn't matter, as she is long since over her husband. But she morally felt an obligation to tell my husband, as she felt he should know. Well, good for her because she's a good woman, obviously. Now, listen to what this OP, the original poster here, says next. She says, I agree with her, but wish she had called me first so I could have confessed instead of blindsiding my husband and I. She says she agrees with her. She had 9 years now, 9 years since this happened to tell her husband, and she chose not to. The only reason why she's saying this now is because she wanted to control the situation, and if truth be known, she would have never told her husband. I pleaded with my husband and asked for his forgiveness, telling him it was so long ago and so inconsequential to us. Can you imagine someone describing an affair as being inconsequential to a marriage? Come on. I also reminded him of how wonderful our marriage has been and told him I will continue to make him and my kids my number one priority. He was obviously upset, hurt, and felt so disrespected, then became enraged, which I had never seen him do before. I've heard that in multiple stories. The woman says, wow, this super nice guy I had, this gentleman, all of a sudden became like the Incredible Hulk. He was just so angry. What do you expect the guy to do? He spent the next hour calling me expletives, including the C and W words. I just sat crying and didn't say anything as I deserved every word he was saying, as he has been nothing but a great man to me and my entire family. After he finished yelling, he left in his truck without saying where he was going. He called me an hour later and said he'd be back this evening. He said that I should have all the kids gathered for a family meeting and be thinking about what I was going to tell them. I asked about what? I then begged him not to make me do this, as we didn't need to burden them. I said I should be the only one suffering for this, but he demanded, saying they need to know the truth about their mother. He told me not to say a word to them until he got home. That evening, I fixed dinner for the kids, but I just couldn't eat much as I was a nervous wreck. They asked where their dad was. I told them he'd be back later as he was working. I then told them he wanted to have a family meeting tonight to discuss something. They asked why and at what time, and I told them to just be here at 8:30. I then texted my husband and let him know we were all set for 8:30. In the text, I also asked him to call me so we could go over what we were going to say, but he didn't. He just showed up right at 8:30 and walked into the kitchen where we all were seated. He was in a much different mood. He was no longer angry. Instead, he was upbeat and gave each of his kids a kiss and a hug like normal. That's a sign of strength, so I applaud him for that. She says he sat down and looked at me and asked if I wanted to start us off. I started to speak, but looked at my kids, then looked at my husband, and tearfully said, I can't. He then proceeded to tell the kids in basic terms what I'd done. My daughter started crying and became angry, while my son, being just 8, was bewildered and scared. My daughters asked when this all happened, and I told them it was years ago and I didn't remember the exact year. See, again here, she's lying. She's already been busted for cheating, but she's now lying, saying, oh, I don't know when it happened. Number one, to probably try to downplay it. But number two, remember when her kid was born, her youngest child there, the young boy, when he was born 8 years ago. Then my son, with fear on his face and tears in his eyes, asked his dad if he was going to leave us. Hearing that, I just started sobbing, as I didn't know what my husband was going to say. Thankfully, he said no, he wasn't leaving, but told him he'd be sleeping in the spare twin bed in his room for a while. My husband asked my son if that was okay, and he excitedly told him, sure, Dad. My husband explained to the kids that it was going to be difficult for a while and wanted them to understand things between he and I were not going to be quite the same, possibly for a long time, if ever. He reassured them that things in their world would not change and told them if they ever feel uncomfortable about anything to bring it up to us so we can quickly address it. Now, I was really impressed with what this guy did here. Again, he's showing strength. He's telling his kids, hey, here's what happened. Now, we're going to be together as a family, but things are not going to be the same and may never be the same. And if you feel uncomfortable, to come to us and we'll address it. Again, he's taking control of the situation. He's easing everyone's mind, but he's also making sure that the kids are part of this. So the kids know what's going on. And I think that is very healthy. I was very impressed with this. I'd be interested to hear what you think of him and the way he handled this. Our marriage was never the same after that day, and it took nearly 13 months before we got back to some sense of being a husband and wife. Not full intimacy, but he did progressively allow me some forms of physical contact. So, again, in this story, this wife, this wayward wife, if you will, she's slowly wearing her husband down and bringing him back closer to her. She says this went on for the next 3 months. So she had some form of physical contact with him. He allowed it for 3 months after not allowing it for 13 months. But even at this point, they weren't having full relations. She says, and only when he wanted it. He wouldn't initiate anything with me, but I would take things as far as he'd permit me to daily. Eventually, we did start sharing love again, but he cannot do so while looking at me, and there's no tenderness like before. He says he claims when he sees my face, he imagines my old boyfriend and immediately loses all excitement. I don't understand this, but my therapist said it's not uncommon. She said for some men, this is a subconscious way for them to regain the masculinity stolen from them by the affair. While you may think this is selfish and one-sided on his part, yes it is. But for me, it is a total turn on for some reason, for some unknown reason. And I look forward to these times so much. So before, she said, oh, he was so tender and loving and always made sure I was satisfied. Now he's just basically satisfying himself, and that turns her on. You see how women process things? Just totally different than what you would expect. She says, I do, however, wish we could go back to the way things were. My husband was such a giving man before and always made sure I was satisfied. Now he really doesn't care what I feel, and I think he just uses me as his release outlet. So she's gone from this queen to now she feels she's just his release outlet. Unbelievable. He's told me that he'll never again do things for me that I do for him. If you understand what I'm saying, yeah, I do understand what you're saying, and I think the audience does too. To him, he feels that I'm somehow permanently tainted in that area. It's crazy, I know, but that's the way things have been for the last 3 years. So they've been going on 3 years like this. So they're having relations now, but he's not looking at her. He can't look at her face to face because he sees that other guy. Is that really a relationship? I mean, that just sounds like misery to me. She says, I've grown used to it and have accepted it as our new normal. As I said, I do thoroughly enjoy our new bedroom routine, but I do miss the old times. Everything considered, things were going pretty well between us until this past January. This is when something that should have been a fun exercise turned into something that ended up reversing the months of healing that had taken place. The scabs were ripped off those old affair wounds, and we were back to square one. Actually, it set us back even farther than that. It was then that my son came home and told his dad and I at dinner about a project his 8th grade history class was doing. The project was to map your family in America as far back as possible. The teacher advised the students they could use reports from genetic testing companies, but it wasn't necessary. He said his friends were going to, and he also wanted to. My husband said, let's do it, saying this is something he's wanted to do for a while. I just smiled and agreed with them at the time, and we finished dinner and spent the rest of the night watching a movie. I wasn't really paying attention to the movie though, as my mind was preoccupied with something else. Something I knew could possibly ruin everything we had rebuilt up to that point. While I felt certain my husband was my son's biological father, there was a remote possibility he was not, as his conception occurred between dates where I had been with both men during the alumni week. Ugh, disgusting. I know what you're all thinking, and believe me, I agree with you. But I want to be honest. You haven't been honest up to this point, so I guess now is a good time to start. After the movie, my son went to his room, and my husband and I started preparing for bed. It was then I asked my husband to sit down with me as I had something to tell him. I then told him exactly when the affair occurred and said that there was a remote chance that our son was not his biological child. She forgot the word not in here. He buried his face in his hands and then angrily glared at me. I didn't know what he was going to do at that point. He then got up, packed a bag, took his shaving kit, and left. That's the other thing with this guy. You can see whenever he's at a point where he's going to boil with anger, he just gets himself out of that situation. He removes himself from the situation and then comes back to it to address it later instead of letting that anger come out and maybe doing something that, he would regret doing later, which is smart. I asked him to stay and talk about it, but he just left. I didn't want to alert my son to what was happening, so I just let him leave without resistance. I called and sent him texts, but he didn't respond until the next morning when he called and said he was coming home to talk. I felt so relieved and knew we could work this out as we had been through so much and come so far. Yeah, you've been through so much because of your actions. That's it. And another thing I want to say right now, this genetic testing or ancestry testing, DNA testing, This is like kryptonite for a cheating woman. Because if she has any suspicions that any of her kids may belong to some other guy, she has to be constantly on pins and needles, thinking that someone in the family is going to come up with the idea to do this genetic testing or this ancestry testing, which, as we all know, is getting more and more popular. So hopefully, the advent of this testing being widely available will help squelch the amount of cheating that is taking place. But somehow I doubt it. They're going to keep cheating, unfortunately. But hopefully it'll reduce some of it. When he came through the door, I grabbed him and told him to look at my eyes. He resisted, but I squeezed him tightly, having my arms locked around both his arms and midsection. So she's got him like in a bear hug. He finally looked at me frustrated, and I told him, "You are the only man I've ever loved. I said I would do anything for you, and you know that." I then told him I was 99% sure he was our son's biological father. How could she be 99% sure? I mean, if she had relations with both guys during that week, and if they were like on successive days, how could she really be sure? I told him I only brought this up so he knew the risk. He asked me if I was done, and then said, "Why didn't you tell me this 4 years ago when I found out about the affair? Or better yet, why didn't you tell me this 13 years ago right after you had the affair? Or even better yet, why didn't you just not F your old boyfriend and be a decent wife to me and a good mother to your children?" This broke me. I cried and said, "God knows I would go back and change things if I could, but I can't. I can only control what I'm doing now and in the future." He then told me about what was going to happen next. He said the entire family is going to take the ancestry test. And if our son's tests come back negative, he will be the one to tell him. Then he will divorce me and I will give him full custody of him. So he's telling her right there that if this test proves that my son is not my biological child, I'm going to divorce you on the spot. And oh, by the way, you're giving me full custody of that child. I said I would do that, but told him I was confident he was the father. I then asked him if we could still share our bed and continue being a couple building off where we left off. He told me no and said that I would need to sleep on the pull-out couch in our bedroom for the time being. I was disappointed but was okay with this, as at least he was still willing to share the same room with me. We all took the test, and thank God the results came back indicating my husband was my son's father. After getting the results, my husband helped my son complete his class project. He told me he was so relieved, and I thought things would return to the way they had been, but they haven't. I'm still sleeping on the couch, and my husband has become very distant with me. The only time he really spends with me is if my son is present or when my daughters are home. He also recently joined the board of a local hiking club and was elected VP. So now every night after dinner, if he's not doing something with our son, he's out hiking with his club or working on who knows what with the board. This has been going on like this for nearly 4 months, and I'm feeling lonely and left out. I want my husband back, the one I used to have before he found out about my affair. Well, that guy's not coming back. You destroyed that man. He is never coming back. So just get that through your head. Does anyone have any suggestions for what I could do in addition to what I'm already doing? As I said previously in this post, I've done everything I can think of for him, but haven't been able to penetrate his armor. I know he'll never forget what I've done and will never forgive me, but I'm okay with that as long as we could get back to the love and mutual admiration we once had for each other. Again, that's not happening. You destroyed that with your affair. Even though that affair now has been, 13 years ago? It's still top of mind to your husband. You're untrustworthy. The person he thought you were, you're not. So the only way this is going to work is if you two can establish something new going forward. And I don't think you're going to be able to do that because those kind of situations rarely work. She says, my feelings for him are stronger than ever, but I think he's fallen out of love with me. Thanks for reading this and for understanding my plight. So that was her original post, and now we're going to take a look at a quick update that she has. But before we do that, I want to remind you, if you're liking what you hear, hit that like button. That will help get this video seen by people all over the planet. Now, let's take a look at that update. And this is 2 days after her original post. She says, thanks for all the replies. I wanted to come back and quickly answer some common questions. The first question slash answer. My old boyfriend and I dated during most of high school. I broke up with him shortly after getting to college as the long distance relationship thing just wasn't working for us. So if what she's saying here is true, now this is just what I'm thinking in my head, and tell me if you think differently. I think she went off to college and of course wanted to find herself, and wanted to date around and have a lot of experiences. And therefore, she decided, you know what? I'm going to break up with my boyfriend and do that. That's what I'm thinking. And, if that was the case, that's a better way of handling it than having an open relationship or going off and cheating on her boyfriend. At least she severed ties with him. Again, assuming this is true, but that's what I think happened here. Second question. Now listen to this, and this will change your mind if you are starting to feel empathy or sorrow for her and about her situation. She says, I reached out to him when I went back home, and that's how we connected. Each of us on the committee took a group of names to call and confirm attendance, and I purposely took the list with his name on it. I guess you can say that I was the pursuer here. No, I don't guess. I know 100% you were the pursuer. And in most of these situations, the woman is always the pursuer because the woman is who controls her body. She says, at the time, I wanted what happened to happen. And after it happened, I felt terrible guilt. And that's made me a better person. So does anybody buy that? That, her cheating has made her a better person? Mm-mm. It hasn't made you a better person because you lied for all those years. And the only reason why you're coming out now and saying all these things is because you've been exposed. Your secret has been exposed. It's been revealed. That's the only reason. Third question. My husband has never forced me to do anything. Everything I've ever done with him, I've done willingly. And most of the times I've initiated it. Yes, I do wish he'd hold me, love me, and do all those things he used to do for me before. But I've accepted our new life and enjoy any attention he gives me. When he's happy, I'm happy. And then fourth and final question she answered, she says, my husband has never cheated on me. I know this because 100% of his attention and focus has always been on his family. Well, too bad 100% of your attention and focus hasn't always been on your family. He's a good man, a great father, and the very best husband. Even though our relationship has changed, I'm sure most women on here are in envy of what I have and would gladly trade places with me. And now for a few responses that she got back from the community. The first one from a woman, she says, your husband is going to eventually leave you. Your situation is similar to what happened to my brother. He stayed with his wife for a year and a half after he caught her cheating. During this time, she tried so hard to make amends, but he just couldn't get past it and divorced her. Even today, 4 years later, she's still trying to get him back, but he's moved on. Isn't that interesting? And I've said this in multiple stories. The woman thinks so little of her husband or her boyfriend, whatever the case may be in these stories, that she has to take it upon herself to go out and disrespect him and cheat on him. But then, if that guy becomes a man and grows a pair and cuts her off and gets her out of his life, then automatically she is in total pursuit of him and wants him back. And he's the greatest man in the world. I've got to have him back. He's the one. It's just amazing. Why didn't you just treasure what you had before and not go out there and open them up? Come on, ladies. The next response is from a guy. He says he stayed with you for his kids. I did the same thing when my wife cheated on me, and it was a big mistake. Though we tried to keep our animosity from them, my kids told me years later after I divorced her, they always knew there was tension and wondered why we stayed in that miserable relationship for so long. Here's a prime example. Kids are very smart. They're much smarter than many people give them credit for. And they're also very perceptive. They know what's going on. Even though you may try to keep it from them, they know. He says you and your husband should just divorce and end this mess. And I have to agree with him. And then here's another response here from a woman. She says, I'm in a similar but different situation. My therapist, they're all in therapy after they cheat. You notice that? They're all getting therapy or going to a psychiatrist, whatever the case may be. She says, my therapist told me my husband is withholding affection and intimacy as a way for him to reestablish his dominant role and regain his masculinity. Like you, I'm okay with this, and I will do anything to keep him and get him to love me again. We're only 5 months into our recovery. I'm hopeful, but he's not engaged, and I'm worried I've lost him. Well, you have lost the man that you once had. You destroyed that. Now, this guy, he may simp out and decide to stay with you, but he's never going to be the same man that he was before. Put that out of your mind because that's done. And now for the final update. And this final update came 7 months after the original post. She says, hi everyone. I wanted to come back and quickly update you on the status of my relationship with my husband. My husband has decided that he wants to divorce. Typing this out just fills me with sadness, sorrow, and regret. That's all I've felt since he told me this a month and a half ago. I tried everything to convince him not to, but he had made up his mind. He told me the past 5 years have been miserable for him, and he knows they had to be miserable for me. I told him that I wasn't miserable, and that just being in his presence gave me joy. I pleaded with him to reconsider, but I could tell he was done. He said he wanted to move on to a new life for himself and hoped I'd do the same. He thanked me for the years before I was unfaithful and for the effort I put into trying to save our marriage, but he said the affair, along with my lying and not being forthcoming, were too much for him and he just could never fully trust me again. He said outside of the affair, I have been a great mother and he wants us to remain close and good parents after the divorce for their sake. We're settling everything outside of the courtroom, so the proceeding will just be a formality. We get along so well that his lawyer even asked us once if we were sure we wanted to divorce. I said I didn't, but I accepted my husband's reason for doing so. Everything will be final within the next year, so even if you are totally in agreement and it's an amicable divorce, they must live in a state where it takes upwards of a year to become final. One of the hardest things to do will be selling the family home that we created together. Now, I think in the story last week I did, or a couple weeks ago, it was the same situation where the woman really regretted giving up her family home. Well, you should have thought about all of that before you opened your legs. The home where we conceived and raised our kids. While we will each make a nice amount from the sale, homes in the area have also gone up so much I'd never be able to own one on my own. So I'm now apartment hunting for a new place. My husband plans to do the same, but said he eventually plans to buy a place, possibly somewhere closer to his office. Our kids are taking it well, see? And my son has just been wonderful. He's a guardian angel, that boy. Having him around has lifted me through some really bad times. My daughters have been great as well, but they're both busy with school and don't get home that often. I plan to start looking for a job later this year, but for now I'm going to take a couple months off to work on myself. Why do you have to take time off to work on yourself? You've been a stay-at-home mom for all these years. Part of working on yourself should be getting a job. With all the stress in my life over the past 5 years, I've put on some weight. My doctor says my blood pressure is way too high, as is my weight, so she must have really gained some weight. I don't drink, so instead I turn to food to cope when I'm under stress. Unlike my husband, I don't exercise or eat healthy. So I think she added the word watch in there mistakenly. I think she meant to say, I don't exercise or eat healthy, so I've gained quite a bit, especially recently. My goal is to get back to the weight I was when we first got married. In closing, I want to thank everyone for the thoughtful replies and concern for my well being. I never thought my life was that interesting, but apparently it is. Don't feel sorry for me. I will be all right. The darkest days are behind me, and I'm now coming into the light. Who knows? My husband may change his mind or come back to me at some point in the future. Stay grateful. So that's her story. Now, I want to point out right here, I think her husband handled some things brilliantly. And of course, there's one thing that he handled very poorly. The things he handled brilliantly were number one, when he got to the point where his anger was going to boil over, when he found out about her affair and confronted her, and then when she dropped that bomb on him that his son may not be his, instead of exploding with anger, he took himself out of the situation. He composed himself, and then he came back and addressed it. I think that is very smart and a good takeaway from this story. Number two, I think the family meeting that he had with his kids and his wife to inform them of what his wife had done and let them know how things are going to be different for the time being and possibly forever, I think that was also smart because so many times people try to shield their kids from what's going on. Kids are very perceptive. They know what's going on, even though you may try to keep everything from them. So I think it was brilliant for him to do that. And the way he handled that like a strong man. He handled that like a boss. Now, where he made the big mistake, and he was probably doing this for his kids and maybe also thinking, hey, she did this so long ago. She did this to me so long ago. She's been so good since that time. I'm going to try to give this a second go round. And you can see all he did was waste 5 years of his life and he was miserable. So my advice is never do that. You've heard me say this on multiple videos. Whether it's a man cheating on a woman cheating on a man, the best thing to do is sever that relationship and end it immediately once the cheating has taken place. So, those are my thoughts. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? How do you think this guy handled it? Were you impressed how he handled controlling his emotions and how he handled that family meeting? And what do you think about him trying to work things out with his wife and, trying to stay with her? Would you have done that? Or would you have, severed ties immediately and moved on? Tell us about it in the comments. Also, take time to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and please subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you on the next one.